test whether my x variable is significant, well, that would be my HO and HA. But the slope in this model is not talking about years of experience. The slope in this model is talking about the salary effect. But my HO and HA would be the same. And, you know, technically there are 7 steps, like I said, but really what we need is HO and HA. We need a t-stat. Does Minitab give me a t-stat? It does, right there. Now notice Minitab gives me 2 t-stats. Which one do I need? I need the 3.42, the one that goes with salary, because that's what I'm testing. I'm testing the salary effect, so I need that 3.42 here. Now again, as we have talked about as well, in years past, sometimes I give students partial Minitab output. In other words, I might not give you the t-value, but again, you would have the formula, and the formula for the t-value is B1, the slope coefficient, divided by SV1. Which we said last time, that's the standard error of the slope coefficient. So if I didn't give you 342, what is the coefficient for salary? 0.2294. What's the standard error of the coefficient for salary? 0.0671. So if you didn't have that 3.42, you would just divide that by that, and that would give you 3.42. Now, if you didn't have a p-value here as well, you know, you couldn't do a p-value by hand. You'd have to look up the critical value in the table. But we talked about this last class. Is this a one-tailed or two-tailed t-test? Two-tailed. So you would split alpha in 2, and you would need to know the degrees of freedom. Well, degrees of freedom, as we talked about, again, this will be on your formula sheet, but it's basically just n minus 2 for this test. And there's 30 baseball teams, so that's 28. Anyway, we walked through this last time. Yeah. Technically, it's n minus p minus 1. But since we only have one x predictor, it's always going to be n minus 1 minus 1 in this chapter. Not in the next chapter, but in this chapter. Anyway, that will be on your formula sheet. You can look up that t-value in the t-table and get your fences, like we talked about last time. But Minitab's nice enough to do all the work for us. So Minitab gives me the t-value and gives me the p-value. What do I do with that p-value? Compare it to alpha. And this number is, assuming alpha is 0.05, this number is less than 0.05. So we would reject HO and accept HA, 95% count. So what does that mean? There is a relationship between salary and winning. So salary is significant in regression terms. This is, low p-values indicate this is a significant predictor of whatever we're trying to predict wins.
The regression equation is how much?
This is my estimate of how much of an effect salary has. The p-value, though, tells me if the p-value for this had been, well, we'll do another one in a minute. Yeah, hang on to that question for a minute. This tells me whether it's significant. This tells me how big I think the effect is. All right. Now, the last thing I wanted to point out to you guys is down here at the bottom. Well, let me go up here. I remember now, I did this twice so I can scroll. At the bottom, Minitab gives us a little box for what it calls unusual observations. And one of the reasons I really like this data set, there are 2 types of unusual let me try that again. There are 2 types of unusual observations Minitab will flag. Some unusual observations it puts an X beside, some unusual observations it will put an R beside it. And they give you a little key down here. R means large residual, X means unusual X. But let me tell you, don't do this on the test. If I ask you what is unusual about observation 30, do not tell me it has a large residual. That just proves you can read. What does a large residual mean? What is a residual? Leftover, but in the context of regression. Remember we talked about residuals? Our residuals were errors, how much we missed that prediction by. So if Minitab puts an R beside one of your observations, What it's telling you is that's an observation that you missed by more than we expected you would. We expect to have some errors. We expect to miss. You know, we don't expect every dot to be perfectly on the line. But if Minitab puts an R beside one, it's saying that's one that you missed by a lot. Well, actually, we've got a couple of things there. How much do you have to miss by for Minitab to call it unusual? That's one question. All right, I'm going to ask you to think back. Do y'all remember in Stats 1 talking about something called the empirical rule?
I remember reading it.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't expect you to remember a whole lot about it. The empirical rule basically told us if we're looking at bell-shaped stuff, then about 95% of the observation should be within plus or minus 2Z, 2 standard errors, 2 standard deviations of the mean. Notice Minitab has a column here called standardized residual. That's essentially Z-scores for your errors. So if you have an observation that has a standardized residual outside of the 2 range, either above 2 or below -2, Minitab's going to flag that. That's Minitab's cutoff, 2Z essentially. And if you notice, team number 30 had a -2.64 standardized residual. That's why Minitab flagged that one. It was outside of the 2 range. So what do you do? Actually, before we talk about that, Julie asked kind of a question, sort of maybe. Notice the table, the information they're giving me. Team number 30, their wins, this is the actual value for team number 30. They actually won 51 games. This next column is called fit. That's your predicted value for the team. So our model predicted, based on their payroll, we predicted they would win about 81 games. They really only won 51 games. So we missed that team by 30 wins, basically. We over-predicted that team by 30. We predicted they would win 30 more games than they actually did win. That gave them a standardized residual of -2.6, and that's big enough that Minitab's going to flag that one. So what do you do if you have a big standardized residual? You know, one you've missed by more than Minitab thought you should miss it. Well, there's no perfect answer to this. Empirical rule. Remember we said 95%? That means 5% you expect to miss by more than 2. So if I've got 30 baseball teams and I have one that has an R beside it, I'm not going to be really surprised by that. I mean, that's not going to make me think, oh, this model's terrible, I need to throw it away. What I am going to do, though, if I have a team like that, I'm going to go back and look at my data and say, okay, team number 30. Actually, let's just draw a scatter plot. I think this is an easier way to see it. Wins, salary. Do you see a dot that you think is unusually far off of the line?
Mhm.
Which dot? Well, there's 2 that I could make an argument. That one seems to be pretty far above the line. That one seems to be way far below the line. So either one of those dots could be the one. But if you point at this one down here, Minitab will pop up and tell you that is team number 30. So that's the one that Minitab flagged and said that was the one that you missed. Again, their actual win total, if you go over here, was around 51. If you go up to the blue line, or I'm sorry, the red line, you'll see that your prediction for them was about 81. So we over-predicted that team's winning by about 30 games. This is where, again, this is not like a testable thing, but if you were trying to do regression, I hope you know a little bit about what the model. I'm assuming most of y'all are not baseball fans.
What's that?
If your answer to that is base what, then you would not do a baseball regression model probably. If you were a baseball fan though, you might look back at this team and say, oh, that was the Arizona Diamondbacks that year. And if you knew anything about baseball in the early 2000s, the Arizona Diamondbacks decided they had a new stadium and they wanted to impress the people. So they decided they were going to go out and sign a lot of older free agents. All right, if you don't know anything about baseball, this may not help. Free agents, people that aren't under contract, they can sign with whatever team they want to. And those older free agents, superstar older free agents, used to get really big contracts. So the Diamondbacks decided they were going to go out and sign a lot of these superstar older free agent players. And they spent a lot of money on those players. But older players, as they tend to do, they get hurt a lot. So the Diamondbacks went out and signed a whole bunch of these older players. They got hurt a lot, so they were paying these players a lot of money, but they weren't actually playing. So who did the Diamondbacks get to actually play the games?
I guess nobody, if they all got hurt.
Like their minor leaguers they had to bring up to fill in for them. So they were paying these superstars, but superstars were all injured. That might explain why they underperformed so badly in 2000. That's kind of what you want to do with the big R's. You want to, well, first, you want to make sure you haven't made a data entry error. Maybe when you were putting the numbers in, maybe the Diamondbacks really did win 81, but when you were keying them in, you hit 51 instead of 81. That happens more often than you would believe. That's the first thing I would check when Minitab says, hey, go look at this one, see what's going on with it. The first thing I would check is just the numbers, make sure I didn't put in a wrong number. If I didn't put in a wrong number, then I would try to figure out why this team didn't win as many games as we thought they would. And if you can come up with a good reason why they didn't, then you can make the next decision. You know, should I take the Diamondbacks out? Because I'm trying to figure out the effect of salary and winning. I'm not trying to model injuries in this case. So maybe in this case you would decide, you know what, I think I'm going to take the Diamondbacks out of this model. Maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. That's something we'll talk more about in the next chapter. But this is what Minitab is alerting you to when it gives you an R. There's a team or a result that is, we missed it by an unusually large amount. That's what the R indicates. But if you'll notice, if we go back to our session window, there's another type of unusual observation, ones that Minitab puts an X beside. And this will not get you much credit on the test, but what does Minitab tell me that's